Hi everyone, and welcome to this event. My name is Stephan Hirschi. I'm the head of finance of ConnectINg St. Gallen, and I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to the topic, and then I'll give the floor to our moderator of today, Tanya König, so that she can present herself, present the speakers, and then start the discussion. Today is the second day of our annual summit. Yesterday, we already discussed about capitalism and capitalism after the pandemic. So more from an economic perspective. So how will our economies change in the future? And today we'll look more into the business side of the post-pandemic era, and more precisely about the future of sustainability. In fact, since its outbreak, the COVID pandemic has been extremely damaging to both international and local companies. And while most companies had as a purpose before the pandemic to grow and to be more socially responsible and to invest in sustainability, we see a real change in priority. Many companies now are struggling for their survival. So sustainability might not be a priority for all of them. But on the other hand, many people are actually saying that it is maybe the time to really change the way we're producing and consuming. So the pandemic could have been an opportunity or a threat at the same time for sustainability. And this is exactly what we would like to discuss today. So that's it for my introduction. Thank you very much and have a nice event.
Thank you very much, Stephan, for the kind introduction. And hello, everyone. Also from my side, welcome to today's event. As said, my name is Tanya König, and I'm really looking forward to moderating this panel titled, "In this crisis, is sustainability still a priority for businesses?" And I'm very delighted that we have an amazing group of speakers, and I would like to introduce you to them. And we start with Natalie Kenway. She's a journalist covering responsible fund selection, and she writes for the website ESG Clarity, amongst others. In recent articles, she looks at how companies are helping society during COVID-19, or how the gap between ambition and action can actually be bridged when it comes to sustainability. And she's joining us from the UK. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, thank you very much for having me along today. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being with us. Then we have Stefan Hirschi, who is leading a team of sustainability experts as a director at PwC. And according to him, his team is devoted to generating a business impact. Previously to his job at PwC, he worked at the Klimastiftung Schweiz, and he's a volunteer in the advisory council of the Swiss Climate Foundation. Hi, Stefan.
Hey, everyone. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to certainly an interesting discussion.
Great. And then also joining us as a panelist is Florian Krause. He's a researcher and lecturer in the field of business ethics at the University of St. Gallen, so probably where most of you are studying. He holds a PhD from Leibniz University of Hanover in economics. Hi, Florian.
Hi, Tanya. Hi, everyone.
Then last but not least, we have Bertrand Gacon. He's a co-founder and CEO of Impaakt. The fintech Impaakt has also been called the Wikipedia for impact investing. Previous roles include head of responsible investments at BNP Paribas, or head of corporate sustainability at Lombard Odier, or project leader for the Swiss Social Stock Exchange with focus on sustainable finance. Hello, Bertrand.
Hi, Tanya. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be with you today.
Great. It's wonderful having you all. So just a quick note to you outside. Of course, this is a live event, so it should also live a bit from the interaction. So you are also asked and welcomed to send in your questions via the Q&A or the chat function. You can just type them in, and I will try to include them in the discussion. And otherwise, we try to answer them in a Q&A in the end. So just keep on sending in your questions. And I would like to start to just set a basis, a ground for everyone, just so that we are talking about the same thing when we're talking about sustainability, what we understand under sustainable development. And I found a definition by the Brundtland Commission report of 1987, where it says that sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So I would like to know if you agree with that, or what else you would like to add. Maybe let's start with you, Florian.
Okay, thank you. I think I would agree, basically. The tricky part comes, of course, when we define our needs, or when we define the needs of future generations. And here we can set quite different goals for the time that we have and for the things that we think future generations might need or want or like to.
Great. Who would like to add something?
Probably myself proceeding. As well, I would in general agree. I think when the Brundtland Commission came up with that statement years back, so it's quite a long time ago already, they had in mind that we speak more about solving some societal issues that we were exposed at the time as well, and also with the environmental impacts alone. Now, what we see right now happening is that sustainability has moved on to becoming actually more so a business issue, in the sense that it's key and it's critical that the current economy moves on towards integrating aspirations all around sustainability, which is probably not the thought process which was there years back. And this is probably also what we can comment later on as well, on how key and critical actually that all is and has become over the years.
Yeah, I think if I just add a comment on that, it really goes back to both comments from Florian and Stephan, is what are the needs that we need to address for today's generation and for tomorrow's generation, and what are the role businesses are playing in terms of addressing those needs. You know, of course, basic needs are the most easy to understand. The need to get access to food and clean water and energy and education and all those very basic needs. But then there's a whole array of services and products that businesses are putting on the market every day. And the real question is that how much do we need all of those products? Do we need to consume them with as much I would say intensity as we have today? And what are the consequences of producing those goods and services, not just for us, but for future generations, definitely. And from that respect, the Brundtland report definitely had I would say at least a very philosophical but very accurate way of framing the issue. Is not just a problem for us to address today, but it's a problem, that is also our kids and the kids of our kids and the kids of the kids of our kids and so on. So yeah.
Absolutely. I see, Natalie, you're nodding a lot.
Yeah, I do nod a lot, actually. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think everybody's right. What I would just add, for me, sustainable development from a business perspective, from what I have seen, is how can you sustain your business? Sustain is the sort of operative word, into the future, and it is about considering that the company's impact on the environment, society. How are you looking after your employees? How are you making sure that the products that your customers are buying are having a beneficial impact on the environment and society? And also, I think it's about being transparent around those things as well, and making sure that those plans and considerations are long term. I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of what, making a positive impact on what's going on around you, and making sure that the organisation is always trying to move forward to be in a better place, rather than just focusing on what can make profit, because that will come after. You're focusing on those things first. That's what I think.
Absolutely. Then we will dive deeper into that. But Sofian mentioned the pandemic can be seen as an opportunity or a threat. I would like to go a bit before what happened before the pandemic. What stage of development companies were at with regard to environmental sustainability and social responsibility. So what was the status before the pandemic? And then we can go into what happened during the pandemic. Maybe Natalie.
Yeah, I think before the pandemic, companies, I write about ESG, so environmental social governance. So companies were very much focused on the environmental side. But that's changed a lot since the pandemic. We could see with the lockdowns, we could see the effects of those that are going on around us, reduced pollution, companies quickly adapting to remote working or flexible working. And we could see how much this was benefiting the planet and also our workforces, with companies reporting increased productivity because people are able to be more flexible and have more time because they're not commuting. And we've made massive leaps forward in that sort of flexible working in a short space of time. But so the focus on, there was a lot of focus on environmental, but now there has been a lot of focus on social as well. Obviously, it was a very, it's a human crisis. There's a lot of emphasis all of a sudden on how companies treat their employees, how they treat their customers, the people that work for them in their supply chains, or were the executives of the companies paying themselves bonuses, then cutting lots of staff. There was also this big focus on corporate culture, and what that became really important all of a sudden. And often fund managers have placed an increasing focus on the social element and the corporate culture side. And we saw that those companies that did focus on that they performed better during the market turmoil of last year and have had lasting reputational benefits as well. They've boosted their brand value. So yeah, I think with regard to the sort of environmental and sustainability and social responsibility, the focus very much was on environmental before, but it very much increased on the social side now.
Okay, then maybe Stefan, what about the challenges? Why were maybe companies not going towards sustainability? How has it changed in recent times?
Well, in recent times, probably considering that as 2 or 3 years back, roughly, I would say before that period, the topic of sustainability was more so looked at as being a philanthropic topic. So business was asked to contribute from a philanthropic point of view to solve some of the societal or environmental issues. So that was predominantly the case, which resulted in many businesses looking at it actually as more so as a nice way to beef up their business stories, do a little bit of marketing on top and sprinkle it with a nice and shiny brochure and report on top. Now that has clearly changed. So just before the Corona or COVID year, I would say there's been a lot of development in the regulatory space that came in, basically as a response to some of the challenges or commitments on a global level that were happening. So clearly, for example, the Paris Agreement resulted now in a number of regulatory aspects because in essence, the governments realized that just going as is and basically doing the job not in beefing up the steps towards regulation doesn't help anymore. So they had to find ways on actually interfering with the business doing it. That basically lead to all these kind of regulations. So before that COVID year, this was certainly more the dominant topic. I would say when it came then throughout the past year, many companies realized then on top that while actually thinking about compliance and fulfilling the regulatory demands, that they also saw that some issues actually become really practical an issue. For example, dependency on global supply chains. All of a sudden, it became really concrete. No one had thought about it in such a way so far. Impacts in terms of new ways of working together. Reducing energy related actually emissions, for example, in that context as well. Or also societal challenges. Not only speaking about human rights aspects as well, of course, but also the challenges that we have in our days in the way on how we work together is actually the kind of virtual mode that we have from a society point of view, the good one. Don't want to say that we have the solutions already now, but it triggered these kind of discussions now. And I think that has accelerated heavily throughout the past year.
Great, thank you very much, Stefan. Maybe Bertrand, what about you? Do you think COVID-19, I mean, sustainability is this trend buzzword as well, but also a lot happened. The COVID-19 stopped or accelerated it, and maybe which areas?
Yeah, I think as Sofian mentioned during the introduction, I think, you know, the answer really depends on the type of business and sector. Some of them have been very badly harmed with the crisis, and it's a matter of survival. And I think for those businesses, you know, there might be some short-term priorities that have led to postpone some sustainability transition that were initially planned. For some other, it would be an accelerator because they actually are thriving because of the COVID situation, and they will, you know, just use that leadership and that growth as an opportunity to accelerate on that transition. So I think there will be leaders and there will be laggards because of the COVID situation. It's not like a, you know, one size fits all story. If I may just go back to the maybe a broader view on what I see how I see the transition and I mean the staging about sustainability with business having progressed over the last maybe 20 years. When I started well, not 20 years, but almost 20 years in 2004 in the sustainable finance industry. It was very new, it was very niche. We had to wait for many years to see really some type of significant progress. I think an acceleration happened in 2015, which was the year where we had both the SDGs being created by the United Nations, of course, the Paris Agreement. We also had the Dieselgate on the same year, which also was a kind of a wake-up call for some investors about, you know, how dangerous it would be to ignore some of the ESG criteria. But for me, what happened, if I take a broader picture, is that for a long time, until the end of the 80s, the only role that global society was seeing in business was making profit. That was what was expected from a business, just make profit and maximize profit for your shareholders. Then on top of that, we added up the notion of responsibility. So it's good to make profit, but you have to do that in a responsible way. And this is where the CSR, so corporate social responsibility, and the responsibility word is very important there, started to develop. And all the ESG movement that was created was very much focusing about that dimension, which is how responsible is the business. And I think what has really changed in the last 2 years is that we're now moving into the next step, which is going beyond responsibility, really about what is the value that your business is bringing to the planet and society. So it's not just good to, you know, to do whatever is your type of business, just do it in the nice way. So it's not just about the how you are actually doing your business, it's about what is your business, what exactly do you bring to the world. And you know, for me, a sustainable tobacco manufacturer just does not exist. You know, you can treat your employees very well. You can make sure that there's no child labor. You can grow organic tobacco leaves if you want, but at the end of the day, the real question is how much good do you bring to the world by selling cigarettes? And we all know that cigarettes has many negative effects, of course, health issues, but also economic issues. And this is just not a sustainable business at all, you know, regardless of how many efforts those companies could put into becoming more sustainable. So the real question for a tobacco company, but for any business in the world, is my business, is my core business adding value to the world? And if the answer to that question is no, then the real answer is, then I better change my core business. You know, I better transition to something different. And I think that the question, for instance, that energy producers have asked themselves, you know, if your core business is to provide energy to the world, then you probably have a positive impact. Now, are you providing that energy through, fossil fuel or through renewable energy? At the end of the day, you're still an energy producer, but you don't get to produce that impact through the same negative externalities. And I think the very big and interesting change that I see in the very recent time, and that has probably been accelerated by COVID, is that we are fundamentally questioning the role of business into society. It's not just about do whatever business is yours and just make sure you do it responsibly. That is not good enough any longer. Now the question is, make sure that your core business is actually valuable to society.
There's also a lot of greenwashing. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of communication around that. Everyone wants to put themselves in the best light. So maybe Florian, how do companies actually do sustainability, which is usually not the same what they pretend or write about?
Yes, and I think the points that Bertrand just mention, point to this in a little bit in the direction. Before Corona, I think we had sustainability. There were some issues that were perceived as being sustainable. So you save some energy, or you pay your workers a good wage, you have a transparent supply chain or whatever. These were like elements that we would perceive as sustainable, but what sustainability actually means is not really a fixed term. So companies had a lot of room in there to say, okay, we are using biodegradable coffee cups, and therefore we are more sustainable. And we didn't have really a frame to judge that, because of course it is more sustainable than having non-degradable coffee with no caps at all. That would be much more sustainable. So I think what we have learn from Corona a bit is that we need a discussion about what do we perceive as goals to achieve. And here we have some goals that obviously are not as clear to us, I think. The tobacco company would be a perfect example for this. You can look it from a certain perspective, saying that it hurts the health of the users, it creates addiction, but it's also giving jobs to a lot of people. And to say we shut it down would leave a lot of people not having jobs. So you would need an idea of how to deal with those people then, because you could say, okay, that's so sustainable, we don't want to do this anymore, but then we just fire a lot of people. So we now see, and I think here for the Corona crisis is a good chance, because it had us forced to define, like, for society, that we have a problem with this pandemic, and we need to act together to solve this problem. And therefore, companies had more job flexibility. The state jumped in and backed them up with credits and stuff. People started to work at home, and so on and so on. And so we have a status of, like, where we can bring things in motion. And this is quite a good situation for change. So now we could sit down again and say, okay, what are the goals that we need in society? How do we want companies to contribute to that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Great. Does anyone want to comment on that, or otherwise I would go on?
Just maybe one comment is to say this was part of an important exercise that of course the United Nations did in 2015. It was to try, and we all know it's not a perfect exercise, but at least to try to come up with common goals that would be agreed by not just the businesses and civil society, but by many governments on the planet. So those the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the famous development goals. They come with 160 sub-targets, and of course it's not perfect. Of course they are not messy, as we say in consulting, and so there's some gaps, and there's some overlaps, and there's some missing areas, and many issues with that. But at least it was, for me, the first time where 190 nations came together to try to define a common language, and to try to say, what do we want to see changed by 2030, and make sure that everybody is trying to work in the same direction. So that was at least one attempt to do what Florian just mentioned, to try to define common goals.
Well, and now it's the time to actually put that into action. Okay, then I would take a first audience question into the round, which is specifically to Natalie. Kenway, where do you think fund management houses are still failing? What developments would you like to see there?
Well, thank you for that question. So yes, we have been looking into this a bit recently. We have sort of taken notice of fund managers looking at the companies they're investing, asking them to meet different criteria in terms of ESG asking them to have diverse teams, asking them to be more environmentally friendly, then not necessarily looking inwards at themselves, not really looking at their own companies and their own business practices. We've actually set up a campaign for better governance within the investment industry on the back of that. And I think, yeah, we'd just like to see a bit more looking inwardly, and also with some of the engagement reports that we've been seeing is, I'm not saying all of the asset managers are doing this, but perhaps cherry picking some of the best where they have voted in favour of removing people because they're not meeting sort of diversity criteria, or they're not supporting climate policies or something like that, but not necessarily revealing all of the other voting practices that they've put forward, just cherry picking the best ones. So I think, yeah, so a bit more transparency and a bit more ownership of where the stage that they're at the moment would be good to see. And I think it would help the whole industry move forward.
Great, thank you very much. Then Stefan, you mentioned regulation that is coming into place. So I was wondering who should actually have the task of assessing, the business sustainability, because as Florian also said, it's a wide term, everyone interprets it, or there was a lot of space to interpret it how you wanted it. So I guess we would need standard rules. So yeah, who should do that?
Interesting question, because the plain simple answer actually would be, it should be the owner of a business and potentially those who are driving the business in terms of customer and clients, who should have a say or have a significant influence on these businesses. Basically saying, on the example of tobacco, if tobacco is considered as a bad business, let's say from an impact point of view, probably customers should decide not to smoke anymore. And then ultimately, there's a clear reason why that business is out of the game from there on. So, but this is a really plain, simple answer. It's probably more complex. Now, we have to see in what environment the business is actually doing its job somehow. And we have different jurisdictions where the regulator has a huge influence. So basically, what's the license to operate all about? Am I somewhere doing my business where it's plain simply accepted under the legal terms to do that or not? This is one way of looking at it, which means the regulator should have a say in terms of certain topics at least, and looking at it and punish or also provide incentives in a certain way as well. And on the other hand, still again, probably the owner or more so the investor should play a much stronger role. And this is what we see currently happening a bit. I'm not saying that is already resolved, but now as the financial community is basically more so driven by regulation in the sense of they have to incorporate transparency requirements. They have to show more often what they do, how they do it. As just mentioned before by Natalie, it's not yet perfect, but it's something which is driven at the moment. And the plain simple reason is it's driven because everyone has understood that there's a lot of green and whitewashing happening in that market. So one has to understand what's really and truly sustainable in the financing and investing community. So this is one way of looking at it. And certainly that basically means if there's no money flowing anymore into the directions which are not sustainable from there on, that clearly triggers then action on the business end. Because all what they have to do is earn money to pay wages, to pay others, taxes, and so on. And if that stream is not coming anymore, that's a clear guidance towards transforming the business, because they would be out of the game from there on. On top, and this is a bit the experience that I have after like 20 years working in those topics, I would say still the regulator should be ultimately take over some responsibility. I can't imagine, for example, climate change issues being resolved by the business only. It must be the regulator stepping up and setting the rules, boundaries, what are the limits, and if something goes wrong, they have to say on how the business has to act, and the society, because ultimately it's all of us actually having a role, not only the business, because the business only serves us, not quite often, not the other way around. So there I would say that the regulator needs to come up with a law that tells us, okay, this is the threshold. And from there on, if everything is not done by you individually as a business, you have to follow what we're going to tell you. The only big challenge is actually that then again, we have different countries with different laws. So the SDGs are an example where there was a common sense, but as soon as it goes down to the level of different countries coming up with their own individual solutions, then again, we have the competition. Because, for example, Switzerland is certainly not coming up with the same solution as the US or the European Union, UK, Asia, and so on. So this again is a little bit a tricky thing, where I would say, in the best case, someone on a global level, whoever that is, should come up with a regulatory power and push it through to solve some of these global issues.
So I saw a lot of reactions on your side. I saw Florian being a bit surprised in the very beginning, Bertrand kind of nodding. I saw Natalie raising her eyebrow at one point. So what went through your mind?
Is that to me? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I've been in this role just over a year now, and I have thought about what we do really need is some sort of global framework, some sort of universal language, because this is a relatively new industry or concept for a lot of businesses and sectors. So yeah, I think I completely agree with that statement, but how we get there, I just really don't know.
Florian?
I would also agree in general, especially the point that we do need a level playing field on a quite large scale. Sometimes I'm a bit skeptic about these global solutions. Not that I think that they are bad, like the opposite is true. However, we shouldn't think that this might solve all of our problems. And the example would be when we say we would like to be fair to each other. This is like a global thing. How we perceive fairness can be quite different. So from each context, it can depend on the social system, on the laws, on like employment and stuff. So sometimes these global frameworks are that broad that you have quite different practices, like down to the countries then. And so I do think we need a certain level playing field that could be reducing CO2 emissions and stuff by blah, blah percentage. This could be one thing that is quite clear. However, I think we do need to have a look in the respective contexts as well, because in some contexts it might be more important to bring people to work or to produce some, to share some resources than in a context there who are more developed. We can look at more specific stuff. So we can have debates on, do I buy this kind of bread or that kind of bread? We still have to keep in mind there are certain places on this planet where people cannot buy bread, like at all. And for them, the discussion is not the same like as we do. So I do think we do need both. And I do think that we should not forget that there is a thing involved that we as social scientists call power. And some companies have quite a lot of power. And when we give them the freedom to decide what they think is a good balance of social and environmental stuff, then we accept that those things go private and are not decided by the people, like in the end.
Yeah, if I may add something, I mean, I think all of that we just said is just for me the reason why we created the Impact platform and wanted to create it as a collaborative, as a common, collective type of approach. because I think that the first thing we need really is robust data. Whatever regulation will come, either local, global, coordinated or not, at one point in time, you will have to hold companies against that regulation to see whether they're really making progress or not. And then you need to measure, how sustainable are their activities, their product, the services, their practices. And it is very complex, as Florian just reminded us, because sometimes, some activities might have some very positive impact for some communities and some very negative for others. Some can have, very negative impact on the short term and very positive on the long term, or vice versa. So the science of impact measurement is highly complex, and it took years, if not decades or even centuries, for the financial data to be standardized, to be made available, to be reported upon in a very normalized way. It would take years before we can get there in terms of impact measurement. But in the meantime, I think the best thing we have to do is to try to measure all of these impact and not let the companies, and probably not let the governments only, decide, what are those impacts of businesses. It has to be a collective effort where all citizens get, in a way, the chance to wait on those assessments, to collect the data, and to commonly establish what are those standards and those measurements. But for me, the biggest enabling factor, which is completely missing today and has been a frustration for me as a sustainable investor for decades, is robust data. If you don't get the data, you're blind, and we all know that what gets measured gets managed. And today we don't get that measure. And the first thing we should be working on is making sure we have a commonly agreed, not just framework, as Natalie was saying. This is also very important, but beyond the framework, the data is really king. Particularly in today's world, we all know that the data is king. And you would be surprised to see how poor is the data available today for decision makers. Would it be government representative, business representative, consumers, citizen, investors? We don't have like a robust universal set of data that we can really use to say, am I going to support a company, or am I going to support another one? And that should all start there. This is why we've created that platform.
So Bertrand, I actually just registered on your platform today. In fact, it's free. And as I understood, so I could also ingest the data and evaluating companies. Is that how it works? So the individual kind of also provides data?
Yeah, it's a kind of citizen science, if you like, approach. Not everyone can do everything on the platform because collective intelligence is very powerful, but also very dangerous, as we all know through the various examples of the internet. So there's a number of very strict control mechanisms. But let's say the most complicated task is really writing up impact analysis. And this is something that you need to go through a specific certification process and then go through a review team. And so this one is very, very tough. And very controlled. But there is another form of contribution which is a lot more open, and this is the rating. Once those analyses have been published, you can read them, and then you can decide, after having read those analyses, how big, how large is the impact, and how positive, negative is the impact. And we document all forms of impact for all companies, like what is the impact of Nestle on obesity? What is the impact of Nestle on plastic pollution? What is the impact of Nestle on feeding the planet? And for each of those topics, you will have a short piece of analysis. And you as a citizen, you can go there, you can first of all read that information, which is probably useful for you to decide, whether you want to work for that company, invest in that company, consume the product of that company. But it's also for you to get a chance to contribute to that common evaluation and say, oh, I believe that Nestle contribution to nutrition is actually more important than Nestle contribution to plastic pollution. Because we know all companies have positive and negative impact. There's no one single company in the world. Even the tobacco company that I use, as Florian reminded us, they create jobs, for instance. So they all have positive and negative impact. But what we want to know is basically what is the net contribution to society. And I don't want to ask any single expert. I don't feel that I know better than anyone in that room. So the only way for me to really figure out whether plastic pollution should be having a higher weight than nutrition is just to ask, potentially millions of citizens and try to structure that process as a collective citizen science movement.
So maybe Florian, on that, I think you're actually researching in that area, how individuals and networks actually create a shared understanding and benchmarks. What would you say, what's the importance there of an individual?
I think the a role that someone can play is quite a big one. We had some projects going with like larger companies and saw how they like adapted certain projects on sustainability. And it was quite interesting to see that they somehow needed a push from outside somehow. So it was a talk by the European Union. There might be something on that coming, and that brought that redistributed like the power structure within the company towards those persons who have been being loud about this before. And then the people would come there and say, oh, you were talking about this before, we would like to talk to you about that. And so and then it's again back to the state where this happens in. So in Germany, for example, and in Switzerland as well, there are big networks of companies and of trade unions, and they work together on certain things. So they define for themselves how they want to perceive this certain topic. What should be like the standard for the companies that deal with that, and then they train the people on that, and yeah, talk about this as well. And the thing is then shown to the politics side like as well, so they could include this into laws and stuff. So you usually have a process that goes a bit of ping pong. So you have people that hear that and know that this is important. Then they can talk to people who bring this onto a broader like societal debate, and because of this societal debate, then they create more things in the company to see how they can react to a certain topic. But it sees that what I've learned as well is that sometimes the debates within the companies are not on a level where you can say this is like benchmarking stuff, because they themselves have limited people who deal with that and who might have a certain perspective on that, and because they are their people, they believe them in a way. So sometimes what we need is a view from stakeholders who have more knowledge in that field, to like show them, okay, when you would like to do something on that, you might want to see that as well. Because sometimes what we see, and this could be seen as like a thing that is problematic by this sustainability thing, that we see that this is something good, and because it's something good, we love to adapt on this quite fast, and this sometimes contradicts the purpose. So we say, okay, we have now this light and it's more sustainable than the light before, then we buy this new light, and then half a year later you will have a newer light which is more sustainable. You buy this newer light because it's more sustainable, and then you have this huge problem that you bought like 6 lights and the first light was still okay, and you did not create more sustainability through that in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a bit a tricky thing. So I mean, we're almost coming to the end of the panel discussion. So I would also like to look a little bit into the future. We also have a question, maybe, you know, about measuring impact, how hard it is. Do you think that we will have one day one single way of measuring impact? We already see, for instance, differences between the way China and Europe understand CSR and impact. So would you think that cultural difference can make it possible to have one standardized measurement, or do you think at some point it will be possible to have one? Who wants to take this one?
If I may try, or at least open the floor, I think we will get there. I mean, again, it took decades before we get there. But if you ask the question about financial metrics, the answer is yes. I mean, we want, it's not perfect, it's not completely aligned everywhere and in every dimension and every single indicator, but the basic financial information is now being reported and monitored in a very standardized way internationally. You can compare the P&L of a Chinese company with the P&L of a Swiss company using, you know, similar data and comparable data, and it was not done easily. You know, it took a very long time before these kind of standards could be agreed and shared, because at the end of the day, there was more benefit for those companies to use those same standards than just to redevelop their own. And so I think we would get there. We are already getting there with a very small proportion of those impact indicators. I think in very just like CO2 emission, we're starting to see something which is now approaching some level of standardization, even though I am myself still a bit skeptic about you know, how good is the CO2 footprinting that companies are doing today. But at least most of them are using the same protocols. And I think the more we will go, you know, going forward, we will just go for more standardization, impact metric after impact metrics. Regulation will definitely help as well. I think the work that the EU is doing right now in terms of standardization, again, it has its benefits and its drawback, but at least at the end of the day, we push for more, I would say, obligation to companies to report on a commonly agreed set of indicators. So yes, I think it will take time, but yes, I think we will get there.
Great. Then another Q&A question from the audience: Deliveroo's IPO had quite a mixed reception due to investors' concerns regarding the company's approach toward its employees, a core ESG factor. Do you see this kind of market reaction becoming the norm in the future? Natalie.
Yes, I think we will. I think that was a classic example of what we're going to see going forward. And I know it's not a business, but the similar thing was the Super League. Do you call it soccer or football? I'm not sure, but the sort of uproar because of the people felt that it was wrong. It was wrong. It was money grabbing. It was dominating. It wasn't in the true spirit of the sport. So people felt that it was wrong, and yeah, it didn't last very long, did it? So I think we will definitely see more instances like the Deliveroo's IPO in the future.
Then what's your view on technology and sustainability, given some of the issues around supply chains, mining, for example?
I can pick that up. So
yeah, go ahead, Stephen. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, supply chain in general is one of the really, really tricky beasts in the whole game. But just to explore that a little bit, when you speak about carbon footprints and you try to identify as a result of your supply chain or value chain in general, up and downstream, how to do that is actually not that easy. And this basically also goes towards what kind of technology and sustainability solutions we have to find. Most businesses do not have full control over their supply chain. They have a decent control over tier one, which means those that directly supply into them. When it goes beyond, how the heck can I take over responsibility for something which is happening on the other side of the globe, which has gone through 3 intermediate suppliers, and I'm the receiving end here sitting in Europe or in Switzerland. This is really, really difficult. And I think we have to acknowledge that difficulty and the challenges, and also find ways on how to tackle that, which is also, for example, true in relation to mining. While we all have actually the mindset that mining in itself is bad business because of the societal, human rights issues, child labor, you name it. Just one practical example, big mining business from a carbon footprinting point of view is actually much better than artisanal mining, so small-scaled mining, because big mining businesses has a scalable effect in terms of energy use and efficiency gains, which is not true for the small businesses. So again, it shows a bit the difficulty. There's not one single answer that we can use to address, for example, climate change aspects in terms of technology to be developed. And at the same time, expect it also solves the societal and human rights issues. We need to look at it in a quite differentiated way. But nevertheless, it's of course then ultimately the business tasks to respond to these kind of challenges. And currently, the understanding is certainly that technology will play a significant role. We have some topics on the agenda that won't be resolved just by reducing, by mitigating some things, but we have to find solutions in terms of technology helping us. Honestly, I wouldn't know right now which technologies will do that for us, because we also speak about topics which also will only be managed in 10, 20, or 30 years from now. But that's also probably then again, these are investment opportunities for those out there who would like to invest into risky businesses. So this is certainly something that needs to be considered as well in terms of how to tackle all of that. Naturally, for example, I mean, again, a little bit of practical example, if we want to reduce to net zero carbon emissions, that's really a practical topic by 2050, has been agreed in the Paris Agreement. Every country has accepted that. Businesses is meant to go out with the same story. You may have seen that kind of commitments happening in the past 3 months or so quite often. What does it mean? We actually have to think about getting rid of agricultural products like meat if we don't have the technology solutions, because meat is one of the significant contributors to carbon emissions in terms of cattle, for example. So basically, we have to ask ourselves, do we find a technology solution? Do we reduce eating meat, beef in particular, or what it is that we're going to do? So again, it all comes together in a certain way, and in some industry sectors, it might be more significant and important than in other ones.
Great, thank you very much. I actually still wanted to talk about very quickly, but I feel like time is running, but maybe you can keep it brief, and then we hand over to the Q&A, which would be a bit of an outlook, you know, how you imagine a post-COVID-19 world for businesses, what their priorities are going to be, and if sustainability will play a central role in economic recovery. It's quite a big question, but maybe, yeah, as a final statement. Bertrand.
Well, if I keep it very short, I say the future is green. You know, short term is still going to be a probably complicated situation for a number of months and hopefully not a number of years. But I think the trend is there to stay. I mean, there's just no other option. And I am an optimistic, but I see the business benefits of going into that direction. And once the business leaders have understood that, you know, they go full speed. So the future is green.
And Natalie, will it help for economic recovery?
Yes, definitely. I think we were seeing more and more green and social policies being built into government's COVID recovery plans. So if companies aren't already considering how they build these in, that they will be required to do so at some point. I think a lot of companies have realised that if they don't have sustainable business models, then they're not going to be a part of the future. They won't have a seat at the table. And our managers are going into sort of nearly every meeting with their investing companies now and asking for their climate policies or their net zero plans. And we've also, with the lockdowns that we've had, some of those things that have come up, so the flexible working, the limited air travel, they've become ingrained now. I mean, I think in a lot of businesses. So, and they are more ESG friendly. So yeah, I think with regulation and companies waking up to the fact that this is how they remain competitive, then yes, it's going to continue to get bigger and bigger.
Florian?
Yeah, I think so too. We have now a chance that people who make the decisions in those companies saw that they can do things differently. Usually we have our way of doing things and we think this is the way that we should do it because we've been doing this for a long time. And yeah, you can change here and there, little things that don't hurt, but there's no real deep change. And we have seen now that when there is a certain threat that we accept, then we can rethink the way we do businesses. And I think there's a big chance in that when we now see that we need to reduce our footprints here, then we can redo some the things we do business now. For that, I think it's a chance for us, yes.
Thank you very much. And Stefan?
Probably would say that there are only a few occasions throughout all these economic cycles where actually turning things around comes up with such a low price tag. Or in other words, it's probably right now the time where things are still cheap in a way, and where the cost burden are not that big, and where the business actually can benefit from it. While on the other end, waiting too long and not using that opportunity only results in downside risks, which are quite tricky to handle then.
Great. Well, Florian, Natalie, Stefan, and Bertrand, thank you very much for being our panelists. I will hand over now to Henry, who will moderate the Q&A. And for the audience out there, you can also turn on your camera and your mic and actually ask your questions directly. Thank you very much from my side.
Okay, so maybe I can ask something. So I'm really interested in sustainable fashion. And so I have a bit like a question about greenwashing that we already talked about before. So, well, how can I explain this? In the past months or years, I've seen that a lot of fast fashion brands, so the brands that have maybe bring out new clothes every week, I think we all have in mind some of them, they're started to produce like sustainable clothes, maybe like I don't know, like a section of their collection has, I don't know, bamboo or something like that inspired material. And so they're trying to get their way into the sustainable business. But if we watch at the big picture, we all know that those businesses aren't sustainable at all. So what is your opinion about this? Do you think that if there's a big brand that does an effort, we should support it? Or do you think that it's really more about their image and not about maybe getting this little sustainable sector to a bigger one? This can be obviously applied to every sector, not just fashion. And yeah, just to maybe hear your opinions. Thank you.
Maybe if I can add something, because I would have a similar question, or at least the topic is similar. What I have thought about is when you think of fashion industry, exactly, you now see many new options about how you can actually buy stuff that has sustainable materials and stuff. But sometimes you really get to understand how this might probably not actually be the biggest problem, which could probably be the mass production and this habit of having every desire you have right there for you, and you can always find something to buy, and then you have like a cheap option. You can still, I mean, there's still this culture of really buying fast and really in mass. And what do you think about this? Do you think that brands might be focusing on the topic which is not the priority, which is still not going on the main cause of the problem? Yes.
Yeah,
honestly, or go first, Bertrand.
No, go ahead, Stephen.
So my honest thoughts when it's about the big brands, and you probably know these companies anyway as well, I would argue that when it's about producing sustainable product ranges, this is more so leaning towards a nice marketing story. The reason why I say that, it doesn't make sense to come up with such a range while at the same time pushing the fast fashion topic that extensively. So in a way that they haven't changed their business model yet. They're not switching to something which is long lasting and can be reused or any kind of return cycle and so on. It's still their old fashioned business model which is in place. So does it help to have some sort of green branded cotton shirts or something like that? I would argue not that much. It helps them sell more, but not really in the sense of generating much better sustainable impact. On the other hand, probably this is also opening doors to some of the niche offers out there. So we see now actually step by step some companies really dedicating their efforts towards reorienting their business in that space. Thinking it through, what does it mean to be sustainable in the fashion industry? Because it's not only on how you sell faster, more products, but also how you produce. And not only speaking about child labor and these kind of issues, but also where you source from. What kind of cotton do you get? Where is it produced, under what kind of conditions? How do I actually design my stuff? Do I use mixed materials, which makes it damn difficult afterwards, for example, to recycle it, because I can't use plastic yarn and a natural yarn at the same time, and then ultimately at the back end say I can reuse it. So this is actually a totally different thought process. And what we see actually more like the smaller brands are capable of going for that direction than the big ones. Until probably the pressure is big enough. And this is a kind of an analogy to, let's say, the car industry. Why was Tesla so far that successful? Because they were able to start from scratch without doing all the mistakes that all the other car brands had to go through throughout 125 years. Now that has started to change. They're picking up as well. And I probably would argue that this is going to happen in that industry as well. But it will take some time. But I can link you to someone, honestly, if you're interested, who's really deep into that topic, if you're highly interested. Actually, only one who was at the university in St. Gallen, the former team member. He's really an expert on the topic and can probably also give you some insights on that one.
Oh, that would be really nice.
Thank you. Me too, yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see how it could be possible that maybe the whole concept that companies are based on, the whole idea, might be in danger and might not be possible in the future, as you said, as you mentioned. Yes. Yeah. Very interesting.
I think it's a very very important question. I mean, the question fundamentally is we're living in a model where growth is actually the defining success criteria, and to grow you need to sell more and more and more. So it's a model that is based on consumerism, and for a company it's very hard to get out of that addiction. I think there's very few companies, such as maybe Patagonia in the fashion industry, that are trying to make products that you buy and they would actually make sure that they last for your entire life. But you know, it's only a few, because most of the companies, they only successfully they can sell more of their products. And this is true to fashion industry, but it is true to all industries. And this is also why, you know, a lot of the focus has been moved to recycling, and this is not the right solution. You know, in sustainability, we always talk about the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle, and they have to be taken in that order. You know, first you need to reduce. Then if you cannot reduce anymore, because at one point in time you still need to buy a t-shirt, right? Unless you want to go outside naked, then you need to reuse, you know, make sure that the product that you buy, you can, you know, extend their lifetime, and maybe, you know, find other ways of reusing them for a longer time. And then only when you get to the time of disposal, this is where recycling can get into the picture. And today, most of those companies, they are focused on solutions around recycling. Why? Because recycling allows them to keep selling. You know, they sell as much as before, but it's okay because they recycle. But this is not the right solution. The first solution should be to try to sell less, because even if you recycle, unless you have a completely circular economy, which we're really far from having today, as long as a large part of your production process is linear, then producing more means using more resources, creating more pollution, so the first thing you really should be focusing on is reducing, but it is total contradiction with the current dominant economic model. And this is one of the most tricky part in sustainability, is how can you be more sustainable beyond just, you know, recycling your products. You have to continue models where even the definition of ownership is changed, you know. This is one of the concepts behind circular economy, is to change the ownership dimension. You know, you shouldn't need to own your washing machine. You know, what is the need of owning a washing machine? You should actually lease your washing machine, and then the owner of the washing machine should be the manufacturer, so that when it actually become broken, they have to replace it, because you don't own the machine, you just pay them for the service. And so if that's the case, it completely changed the mindset, because those manufacturers, instead of making machine that, you know, they know will break after 2 years and organize the obsolescence of those machines, their incentive would be to make sure that those machines, they can last for as long as possible, because they have to bear the cost of replacing the machine. And so all of those, you know, business as usual type of I would say dogmas that we follow, some of them will have also to be completely rethought, and particularly the sell more is better is one that is completely in complete contradiction with sustainability.
And also, as you mentioned, maybe I had last little thing.
Sure.
Since you mentioned Patagonia, I think it's also a very inspiring example of how you can actively change or kind of influence the culture that you have in your customers. Because in one of the advertisement they had, they said, stop buying our jackets, and they kind of wanted to influence customers on thinking about reusing their old jackets they had, or kind of bring them back, adjust them if they are broken or have some kind of damage. Yes, and I find that it's very interesting, because it takes a lot of courage to say something like that. And it's cool to see someone that wants to be the example and show that maybe something like that could actually work. Yeah, sorry. No, I'll leave it alone.
No worries. I mean,
it's still hard to see whether it's only marketing gimmick or whether they're actually genuine about that. So I think it will need some time before we can see, you know, in a way, they, just like anyone else, they need to sell at one point in time to keep making profit. So we need to wait for, I think, a few more years to see whether it was a real, you know, genuine, authentic move, or whether it was more of a marketing move. But if they're true to their values and their original values, then I think it's encouraging. At least they're trying, and they have issues. You know, they have big issues with microplastic, because they manufacturing so much polar type of fabrics. So they have their own issues as well. But at least I think they're trying to move in the right direction, and the right direction is bold. And bold means it's not just about, you know, having some organic cotton. It's about, you know, how can I reorganize my business so that my value tomorrow doesn't come from just selling more of those products.